Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, you know, a lot of engineers would like to be Paul Jellison. Did you know that? Well, at least today we'll get to meet Paul Jellison. Paul has a big history with WLW, J-Core, Clear Channel, and iHeartRadio, and he's got stories to tell. It's coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionics Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. By Nautel, worry-free transmission you can count on with outstanding control, reliability, efficiencies, and Nautel's unmatched 24/7 customer support. Online at nautel.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. Hello there, I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Delighted to be here, and it's a rainy day. I was hoping winter was over with here in Nashville, but it's not quite. Rainy and chilly, and we've had about 3 inches of rain. This just doesn't feel good, but it feels good being here. I'm warm inside, ensconced in the Telos Alliance studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, surrounded by lights and displays. And besides what's behind me, I got 3 monitors in front of me. Oh my goodness, what a setup. But it's not about me and not about my studio. It's about the show where we talk about broadcast engineering, specifically radio engineering, as much as we possibly can. I'm glad to be with you. Normally Chris Tarr is here, but I just got a text from Chris. He's fighting a transmitter. I think he's crawled deep inside of it. It's in Whitewater, Wisconsin, and that's hard enough to say. So good luck, Chris Tarr. I wish you well, and I know that the Ninjineer will end up conquering the bad transmitter in just a few minutes. So I wish you could be with us. Maybe you could join us in progress. So our guest today, let's go ahead and bring him in without further ado. It's a gentleman that for years I heard about this guy, and I never got to meet him. And we may have crossed paths at the WLW transmitter site years ago, like after the Hamvention, but I really didn't get to spend any time with him. But I did get to spend some time with him last year at the Ohio Broadcasters in Columbus, and now I get to spend an hour with him right here. And that's Paul Jellison. Paul, welcome in. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be seen, and thanks for the invitation.
Well, it's delightful to have you, Paul. And I've heard, like I said, heard about you for years and years. Your engineering, things you take care of, some of the iconic transmitter sites and other engineering responsibilities. And we're going to get into a bit of all of that we can in the next hour, including really interesting stories about remote broadcasts, live remote broadcasts, as technologies changed. And many times you were called upon to be at the forefront of technologies, and you had to kind of fight with the people supplying those. But why don't you give us the elevator speech about who Paul Jellison is? I always associate your name with J-Core and then the companies that came after that. Who is Paul Jellison?
Well, I did come on board at J-Core in 1988 and had a wonderful, wild, crazy ride with that group of people. Made many great friends, and then, of course, iHeart, Clear Channel, then iHeart, and with the merger of Capstar and all the other groups in, I know one of the first times we got together down in San Antonio, and it was the clash of the cultures where the staid folks from Clear Channel, who were very coat and tie, and met the wild, crazy people from J-Core. And we learned a lot of things about each other and had great time doing it. Previous to that, I had worked up in the Springfield, Ohio area, and actually started out as a machinist many, many years ago, worked on as an electrician, and then as things happen, economies change, and I saw the opportunity to get into the broadcasting business, and ham radio has always been a hobby of mine, and so I turned my passion for for radio and electronics that I've had since I was literally a preteen into my career. And I've had a great time doing it and never looked back.
Hey, I didn't get to cross paths with J-Core very much. I remember back in the mid-'90s, I did work for Scott Studios. We made a sales call to J-Core's headquarters in northern Kentucky, and I met for just a few minutes with Randy Michaels there. But I got a business card from Randy, and I believe on the back it said, "The noise you can't ignore." Is that what it said? Was that the phrase?
That's exactly right. The noise you can't ignore, and you had a lawnmower with a broken muffler, you had a dog barking, you had a baby crying,
yeah, dog barking.
You had all these different things on your business cards, and I had a hard hat that had a bulldog barking, and I thought, yeah. So if I wanted to come on a job site and throw my weight around, I would put on my bulldog hard hat. But
I figured that I figured that with a phrase like that, a catchphrase, and you being an engineer with the company, I got to believe that Randy may have tasked you with, now make us the noise that you can't ignore.
Oh yes, we had. Matter of fact, he put out a memo. Randy's very technically astute. And he understands, and especially in AM broadcasting, because that's where he really cut his teeth. And he was all about positive modulation, density, loudness, because on AM, loudness and density is coverage. And he was an absolute prophet of loud. And I can tell you, one time I was working on the old Western Electric transmitter at WLW, and nobody had been able to get the thing to modulate above 100%. Okay. And I worked on it and figured out how to get it to reach 125. And it was sounding pretty sweet. And so I remember I was down at the corporate HQ, and he comes running up to me, shook my hands, "Congratulations." And I went, "Oh, what?" I was just kind of, another day. And he was he was like a kid in a candy shop. And I said, what I do? I said, "I'm glad to accept the accolades, but what I do?" "Oh, well, he's got that transmitter to reach 125%. He says, "Nobody has been able to do that since I've came here." And I'm like, okay.
Well, good engineering practice. Hey,
on the tuning, simple.
We're talking to Paul Jellison, and we're going to find out more about the hats that Paul has worn, and the engineering, maybe miracles, maybe just good engineering practice that Paul's been involved with. And actually, Paul, we're going to make a quick word about Nautel and their involvement at NAB and some announcements. But when we come back from me talking about that for a minute, Paul, I want to tease this a little bit. I heard a rumor, something about Randy Michaels and getting a fine for overmodulation, and that involved a steak dinner as the prize. Now, there may be no truth to that at all, but if there is, maybe you can confirm. Maybe you have nothing to say about it. I don't know, but we'll come back. We'll find out from Paul Jellison in just a minute. The way you're giggling, I think you know what I'm talking about. Hey, Nautel.com is the place to go to find out about, of course, Nautel transmitters, AM and FM transmitters, but also their involvement with the NAB show. And if you're on your way to NAB, my goodness, you need to be at the Nautel users group, even if you're not a Nautel user. Now, you don't have to stay the whole time. Sign up, go there. In the early part of the meeting, they're going to have a number of different technical papers that are going to be given. They've asked me to give a paper there about IP distribution of audio to transmitter sites and some of the things that are happening there, some of the new ideas in audio distribution. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. If you go to nautel.com/NAB, you can then sign up for the thing. Now, they just had a webinar today with some HD radio announcements. That was today. But they have the Transmission Talk Tuesday going on live from the NAB on Tuesday, April the 18th. So that is a week from this coming Tuesday. And then this Nautel users group Radio Technology Forum. That's Sunday, April 16th. So that's a week from this Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Things get started. It goes till noon. They will feed you. And so you need to sign up for that. If you're going to be anywhere near there at all, I highly recommend that. I've gone there, I think about 2 of the last 4 times they've had it, and really had a good time and learned a lot as well. So hope you'll sign up for it too. Nautel.com/NAB is the place to go to register for that for free. And of course, you can be a live audience member of Transmission Talk Tuesday. And in fact, if you're not going to NAB, you could still be part of the Transmission Talk Tuesday roundtable discussion just by signing up for it and attending it online. And if you've got something to say or something to ask, well, Jeff Welton will let you right in and let you do that. Really big thanks to Nautel for all their work educating engineers like us and coming up with new and better products all the time. They've got several technology advances in the HD radio world. Those were announced today during their webinar, and I got privy to a couple of them, but I'm not allowed to say anything yet. But you can find out about them yourself. They will have a replay available of that HD radio webinar, so you can check that out. Thanks a lot, Nautel, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Okay, we're talking to Paul Jellison. I've wanted to talk to Paul for years. We're kind of dialing it way back into the 1990s here, where, Paul, I heard a rumor that if you were a J-Corps station and you got I guess what we used to call a speeding ticket, if you got a fine or a notice of apparent violation from the FCC, or notice of apparent liability, that's it, notice of apparent liability, NAL, for overmodulation, yes. The reprimand from corporate on that wasn't too awfully bad. What can you let us know about that?
I can tell you that, yeah, in that, and I don't remember whether it was in that memo specifically, but I know he certainly said that he expected stations to be loud and proud on the dial, and he had actually commissioned some research to be done and see if anybody ever had been cited for 125% overmodulation. And if I recall, no one ever has, never in the history of the FCC. Now there's been people cited for over negative modulation, which is what causes splatter to happen. And those cases are out there, but not the other way. And so he threw out that. He says, look, he says, you run it hard. And he says, if you're pushing hard and you get her up to 135 or whatever, and you get dinged for it, yeah, I'll buy you a steak dinner. I'll come in town personally, take you out to dinner. So I think the statute of limitations is out on that far enough.
So, it seems that people who are innovative, and not everybody appreciates Randy Michaels. I mean, you can probably point to things he's done that weren't smart, and other things that were very smart. And it reminds me of the fellow, my former boss, the guy who started Telos, that's Steve Church. Steve Church considered parking tickets in front of Riga University to be a cost of doing business, just a cost. I mean, it was cheaper to pay the parking ticket than to worry about where to park.
I can tell you a Steve Church story. We were down in when we were building the studios in Mount Adams, Ohio, in the late '80s. Steve had done an NAB, or not an NAB, but an SBE presentation on his new digital hybrid, and we had been very seriously considering the Gettner. Matter of fact, we had one or two. And myself and Al Kenyon saw the presentation, kind of looked at each other, and Al spoke to Steve and said, I would love to compare the two. And we found his particular unit to be much less harsh sounding. Right. I think he dialed in the DSPs quite a bit better. And so we went with his stuff. When we told him, he said, and Al told him, he said, I think, though, do you have a call director to control it? Well, I'm working on it. And so we said, well, we'll put your system in if you can come up with a call director. And so we were building the studio. It was under construction. And he drove them down from Cleveland. And if you've ever been in Mount Adams, Ohio, it's like a maze trying to get around. You've got one-way streets and all this stuff. Anyhow, Steve hailed down a cabbie and handed him $10 or $5, probably $10, and said, "Take me to this address." I think it was 1111 St. Gregory Street. "Take me to 1111 St. Gregory Street, and when you drive by it, point." And so he followed the cabbie, and that's how he found us. And then he showed up and put his equipment in, which was wire wrapped inside and all kind of strange stuff. And it worked flawlessly. And as upgrades happened, he improved them, and we continually upgraded. But yeah, we've had a long career with him.
It took me a minute to figure that out. Steve drove. He was in a car already. He didn't need the cab, but we didn't have GPS, and he may not have had a map. Yeah. Steve was as brilliant and genius as he was also a little bit forgetful. And sometimes he'd forget something kind of important like a map. So I'm sure he could get to your town, but where's the street? Hire a cab. Hey, point at it when you pass by. That's brilliant. That's
innovative. That's thinking outside the box. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think I ever got to visit the studios at St. Wait a minute. Yes, I think I did get to visit those. All the years that a fellow like Gary Burbank was on the air, would he have been at those studios?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
He was originally on the fourth floor. Is that right? Fourth floor. Yeah. And then we eventually occupied the fifth and the sixth floors. And when he syndicated, we built studios up on the sixth floor. So he was, And, there was originally eventually six radio stations operating out there. Originally only two, so.
Yeah. Wow. And so you may have more WLW stories to tell, but I wonder if we could, begin a look at overcoming some technology challenges, especially now you being involved with a big station, especially a flagship station for a Major League Baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds. Now, about what year did you start working with WLW?
1988. I started in March of 88. So I came in landline and C-band years. And we distributed single channel SCPC, I believe.
SCPC,
yeah. We delivered SCPC to ABC New York or LA, and they would put it up on the old DATs and then CDAT systems, and that's how it was originally delivered. And then final mile to the stadium. From the stadium to the was originally wires, and Cincinnati Bell was not a Bell company that was broken up by the judge because it was never part of AT&T. And so we had wires, literally we had loops available to us up into the 2000. And that was a very unusual situation. We did do ISDN and we did do, other stuff over the years, but we were lucky in that regards, I guess you'd say lucky, and had an excellent radio shop that did stuff. And so while we did embrace some of that technology, and then of course as time went on, I remember one time we were hearing a pitch from somebody that was trying to sell KU band to deliver all of Major League Baseball. And they said it's 99.99% reliable. And I think it was 3 nines. I don't think it was 5. And anyhow, I while the guy was doing the pitch, I pulled out my calculator. I said, so you're pitching us a system that's going to be offline 40 hours a year, and primarily when it's raining, and probably in springtime when we're doing baseball, spring and early summer. And I think you kind of saw his sales deflate a bit.
Oh,
and
man.
Sorry, buddy.
In fact, Paul, I tell you, when we come back from a quick break, we're talking to Paul Jellison. Paul's been there, done that. That's going to be the title of this episode in terms of broadcast engineering. But and the reason I started talking about the Cincinnati Reds, Major League Baseball, and a flagship radio station coverage, that's a big responsibility. Those games have got to be on the air, and nearly as important are the preseason games, the ones that are typically played, from the spring training in Florida. And I want to understand from Paul, when we come back, Paul, I want to understand from you. It's one thing to engineer when your station is at home. You're the home team station. Mm-hmm. And it's and a little more difficult to engineer when you're the away team, but you're going to another ballpark where you've got engineer friends and you probably help each other out. But when you're going all the way down to Florida for spring training, to me, that must feel a little bit like a no man's land. We're going to come back to how you make that happen, what technologies you used then and what they use now to bring those baseball games back. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack, This Week in Radio Tech, episode number 639. We're talking to Paul Jellison, and our friends at Broadcast Bionics are one of our sponsors here. They make amazing stuff for studios, and they've got some announcements to make at NAB that you'll want to see, and we'll tell you about. We're going to be right back after this from Broadcast Bionics.
Welcome to the Bionic Studio. The Bionic Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast-critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These could be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
Smarter. That's the people at Broadcast Bionics. Dan McQuillan and his team there really understand what we do in broadcasting, and they understand it from a kind of a perspective all over the world. So check them out. If you're going to NAB, make sure you see Broadcast Bionics. And if you're not going there, well, whether you are or not, check them out their website at bionics.co.uk or bionic.radio. And stay tuned here. After NAB sometime, we're going to have Dan McQuillan on to talk about some virtualized technology that is really amazing. I work for folks at the Telos Alliance. We've been a partner with Dan and Bionics for many years, and our engineers have recently taken a look at Dan's virtualization technologies, and I can tell you, we're impressed. We're really impressed. So we'll have more information on that coming up. All right, Paul Jellison is our guest on This Week in Radio Tech. Sadly, Chris Tarr is stuck inside a transmitter somewhere in Whitewater, Wisconsin. He's trying to get it fixed, and hopefully we'll get some good news on him getting that fixed. Paul, you're coming to us from Ohio, I guess, from your domicile, right?
Yes. I'm in my marvelous office I built about 15, 16 years ago, and it's my home away from home. It's clear on the other end of the house from everybody else. So
now, is that also your ham shack?
It's yeah, I've got a ham radio set up here. I actually have an official ham shack down in the basement next door, but this I've got a ham shack set up here as well. So
we were about to touch on remote technologies, and you've been through a few changes in how baseball games get backhauled to the flagship. Talk to us about that.
Well, I talked about the loop thing, and those, of course, that's really old technology. And then of course, and I'm really dating myself here. I'm talking about dual line Comrexes, where you take two lines and basically mucks them up and get a 5K broadcast path that usually sounds pretty good, plus or minus phase shift and all that stuff. And, you had a monitor line coming back, and then you had a comm line. So you had ordered 4 telephone lines in. And one of my duties, you had 4 lines, because you had and one of my duties was to order in and out phone lines. I mean, it was a pretty onerous task, because if you didn't keep track of that stuff and didn't order the loops out or the phone lines out, then, the next thing you know, accounting's coming to you going, why are we still paying this phone bill in Plant City, Florida or somewhere? And so there's stuff like that you had to watch. Then of course we moved along to ISDN, and ISDN was an adventure. I would call GTE in Florida and say, you guys doing ISDN yet? And they'd be go, no, we've never heard of that. I'd be like,
oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. And
some people hadn't heard of GTE. Now, they were an alternative phone company, or they were the incumbent in some areas of the country, right?
They were the phone company in Florida, at least in that part of Florida. And I think they were also over in Tampa. So finally, after a couple of years, I called and said, you guys doing ISDN yet? And the girl says, well, I can talk about that. I go, what do you mean talk about? So, well, we can't order it until a certain date. But she said, we just got out of a meeting and I know what it's all about now. And I went, okay. So when on the appointed date, I picked up the phone and called them, and I said, okay, I want to order an ISDN circuit. And I was told it was the very first circuit that GTE ever let out in the wild. That was the one that we put in to do the Reds in was it Plant City, Florida? I think is where they were. And right, Plant City, I think it was. And so we went down and go down and set it all up. Had phone numbers for the central office and for the local manager, and I even had the president of the operator of GTE Florida's phone number to call in case of a problem. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I think I called every one of them at one point or another. And
what year do you think that was?
Oh my. It would have been in the 90s.
It would have been probably, no earlier than 93 or 94.
I was going to say early to mid 90s. Yeah, mid 90s, something like that. Because I remember we had an SBE meeting at Cincinnati Bell at their technology center, and I remember Comrex had sent us a unit, and we took it down to Cincinnati Bell, and they in their little research center set it all up. And I remember the call to London they made to Comrex's test center in London, and I was blown away. I'm like, yeah, that's London, and I'm hearing the BBC, and they're hearing us, and that's awesome. And it's on one pair of wires, and I'm like,
one pair,
one pair, yeah.
By the way, same thing happened in at Telos when Steve Church and Frank Foti were becoming friends and comparing technologies and stuff. Frank walks in, 2 a.m, Steve's up working, and there's classical music playing, and they talk about other stuff. And finally, Steve says, "Oh, by the way, that's the ISDN thing that's coming from that symphony's from being played out in Germany."
Oh yeah, and I know in the evolution of Major League Baseball, the Zephyrs were put in at the away, and that replaced the satellite, the C-band, the last mile loops out to a C-band uplink somewhere, and that replaced all that. And I remember we had Zephyrs, at the stadium, and the deal we worked out was in Cincinnati we would put 2 Zephyr, we'd have a Zephyr in the visiting booth and a Zephyr in the radio booth. Of course, being in Cincinnati and having such a good relationship with the phone company, we just kept loops in. Matter of fact, they still have loops to the stadium to this day.
Wow.
And I was looking at some stuff down there the other day with Dave Abbott, and he was showing me they're getting to the point to where copper is almost impossible to do now. So they're giving them loop-like service, but it is actually some kind of digital backbone that it's coming up to.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. So,
hey, I want to ask you about one thing you mentioned when you had the phone lines, and you could also do this with stereo ISDN, but you mentioned that on the return path, you needed to provide them with monitor, obviously commercials, and hear what's coming back from the radio station. But then you also mentioned a comms circuit. How was this wired into the announcer's headphones? By the way, the announcers, would that have been Marty Brenneman and Joe Nuxall? Is that who that would have been?
Marty and Joe. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. And I am not a sports guy. Those are the only sports announcers' names I actually know, because I grew up listening to the Reds as a teenager in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. But no, talk about the comms coming back. How was that wired up?
Well, basically it was a phone line, and you had an auto answer coupler. And what you do is you'd set your Comrex up and connect. That'd be the path to the station, and then for it coming back, you had an auto answer coupler. You'd dial in, it would ring, pick up, and then we could assign whatever audio we wanted to go down that line through a router, and it would typically be a mix minus bus on the audio console, and you'd mix minus out what everything going back that they needed to hear, and it was just a phone feed. And then of course the fourth phone line was for the producer, which I know when I was producing, I had a boom mic, like a Sennheiser headset, just like everybody else, and I had a Y plug on it, and one ear I was listening to the mix, and the other ear I was talking to the producer back at the studios. And so I was kind of pulling double duty, and I was usually, if they were doing a talk show, it would be, I'd write down Joe Blow's on line 1, line 2, whatever, and here we go. And then, of course, eventually over time, things evolved to where you could take your laptop down and remote in and using PC Anywhere. And remote
Wow.
into the machine and see who's on, and pass notes that way. But
Sure.
yeah, that's how the technology's evolved, and and it's just incredible, what changes have made. Just recently, I had the opportunity to go to a fellow's house who's completely blind, and took one of his old iPhones and interfaced it to a Rode mixer
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and a mic, and he has done newscasts and things like that for years, and had been pretty much out of the business. And a fellow that I do contract work for with my company said, "Hey, I'd like to get this guy on the air again." He says, "I've known him for years," and so we went to his house, and it was amazing watching him use an iPhone sightless. Matter of fact, the owner of the radio station was there as well, and he had to slow him down so I could figure out what he was doing, so I
Oh
could
my God.
help him. And by the time we left, this guy was connecting in, using his old iPhone 6 or something on a wireless router from home, connecting into the equipment at the radio station, and feeding audio in, and was able to sit there and do his remote broadcasting.
Wow.
Yeah. That,
Hey,
so
yeah, the technology improvements have just been amazing, and now we're doing everything over IP, and we'll talk about that and other things. I want to know a bit more about the transmitter side and the 500,000 watt transmitter that I've seen before. But we're talking to Paul Jellison, Paul of Middle America fame. The Cincinnati area, did a lot of work for J-Core, Clear Channel, iHeart, and he does all kinds of independent projects now. Paul, one of our sponsors is Broadcasters General Store, and you can order just anything you need in the world of broadcasting for them. And one of the lines they carry is Henry Engineering. Everybody's familiar with the good old Henry Super Relay. I got to ask you, Paul, did you ever use a Henry Super Relay in building studios to turn lights on and off and that kind of thing?
Not only have I used them, I've probably got several out in my shop, waiting to be used again. So
There
yes,
you go.
I certainly have. Yeah.
I used to wire them up to, of course, the normally closed contacts we'd wire to the ringer on the hotline phone in the control room. So when you turn the mic on, the ringer wouldn't ring. And then we'd take the normally open contacts and wire them to the cassette deck motor, right? So that you could scope your show. Right?
Your skimmer.
Well,
yes.
The skimmer. That's right. Well, they got something different now. Because now things are there's a lot of LED tally lights out there. The Henry Super Light will not run a 120 volt light bulb. Nope. That's not what it does. It's there to run LEDs, and it has its own built-in power supply for that. Or if what's built in isn't enough for you, you can use an external power supply, I believe up to 2 amps, and it will feed your LED tally lights, your microphone lights, things like that you need to come on when you give it a contact closure. It also it still has the normally open and normally closed contacts to do things. For example, if you have like a Behringer console, a Mackie mixer, something like that doesn't mute the speakers when you press, when you turn the mic on, you can get a feed like from the mute button there, and you can, or the preview button, and you can wire it, and so you can run your speakers through here and still turn the speakers off. So you can turn your inexpensive console into kind of a broadcast console that way. But the Henry Super Light, it's an LED tally light controller. There's all the specs about it. Really flexible. I mean, you can give it all kinds of different voltage levels as long as you stay within what it'll do. External 30 volts DC, 2 amps max to run a bunch of LEDs if you need to. One thing that's pretty cool about it are the RJ45 jacks on there. Now, it's not an Ethernet device. No, that's just a simple, easy way to wire several of them together. And the reason you'd want to do that, well, a lot of studios these days are built with like a GPIO node, for example, from Axia. And you've got a bunch of contact closures all in the same place. Well, you can just take a piece of Cat5 cable and run that from one super light to another. And inside the super light, there's a little jumper to give it an address, 1 through 4. So you can actually simplify your wiring and daisy chain these together and always, control the correct one. That's the whole idea. You want to, when you turn the mic on in Studio B, you want the Studio B light to come on, not the one from Studio D. Anyway, that's just a little convenience there that Hank Landsberg invented to make your job easier. There's a whole lot of things at Henry Engineering to check out, all kinds of things to make, for example, sports broadcasting, to make that easier, all kinds of headphone controllers. There's a whole sports broadcasting mixer, lots of cool things from Hank Landsberg at Henry Engineering. So I encourage you to check it out. And when you do check it out, go to Broadcasters General Store. Their website is bgs.cc. And hey, you can get a quote. You can talk to people there. You can give them a call at 352-622-7700. And they will talk to you on the phone. They'll take your order. They'll advise you about what's hot, what's not, what's in stock, what's not in stock, what things they can discount mightily on, what things they can't. I love dealing with Broadcaster General Store. In fact, I was texting just today with Shane Finch. He's the new general manager at Broadcaster General Store. Good guy. I got to spend some time with him and Dave Kirsten in New York City a couple weeks ago. And I highly encourage you to use BGS as your source for broadcast equipment. So check them out at bgs.cc. Appreciate their sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Hey, we're talking to Paul Jellison. And, Paul, I wonder if you could tell us, the iconic WLW transmitter site. Wow. A lot of us driven by it. I got to visit there once. Maybe you can tell us a story or something amazing about that particular transmitter site.
Well, of course, it was the only radio station to ever broadcast with 500,000 watts in the U.S. And that was done in the 1930s. FDR, I guess, supposedly pushed the button from his office in the Oval Office, and they switched the transmitter on ceremoniously. And I know the stories of that era are, of course, relayed through some of the engineers. I did have the good fortune to meet a couple of the engineers before they passed that worked on that. The one guy told about his job as an apprentice college student engineer. His job was to put on welding goggles and walk up on the walkway, because there is a walkway on the top of the transmitter that you can walk across and look inside the PA cabinets, of which there are 3. Each one has 4 tubes running in push-pull. And then the output network, the output of the transmitter was in series, not parallel like you see stuff today, but the output sections were in series, and his job was to go along with welding goggles and look at the filaments and make sure that they were all properly lit and that they hadn't, because the tubes are about 4 feet tall. And so the filaments are long rods, and I guess the inrush current would sometimes cause them to flex and they would short out, and then you had a problem. So, his job was to check these filaments and make sure, look through the glass and make sure everything was looking copacetic. And there's stories of the farmer that lived. There was a pig farmer that lived next to the transmitter site, and he had just put in fluorescent lights in his house, that was a big deal in the 30s.
Yes.
And then they switched on 50 kW or 500 kW, and his lights wouldn't go out. He had to take his fluorescent lights out.
How am I supposed to sleep?
Exactly. And there, there was talk of other things with RF making noise, downspouts on buildings talking and from the RF current. And I know for a period of time I had put in a new Harris DX50 transmitter, and I had ran it over and kind of plumbed it into the back of the old Crosley 50 kilowatt transmitter. And we wanted to get it up and make some tests. And so I had ran the coax down, but it was exposed for a little bit. So I set a ladder up, a wooden ladder up, to keep people from getting close to it. And I laid a fluorescent tube across the rungs of the ladder, and
of course you did.
There. Yeah, and it was sitting there lit and modulating with the RF.
Oh gosh.
Well over 125%, I might add.
I'm sure.
And it was blinking away, and people would walk up and they'd turn the corner and kind of stop and go. I said, "Yeah, you don't want to go back there." And because you only let people in. I wouldn't let people in that didn't know not to run up there and touch that. But yeah.
Oh my God.
That's some of the crazy things. Of course, I lived in the house on site from, I guess, probably about 1990 until I left to be the regional VP of engineering for the Rocky region. And that would have been in 2003. And so my kids grew up there, had a most interesting, place to grow up. And I know my one son has a picture of the, how they used to go around and sell aerial photographs of your farms and your stuff. Well, he's got an aerial photograph he got somewhere of the property, and he's kept that with him for years. But my son had a cat, or we when we moved in, somebody decided we needed a cat. You're living on a 32-acre place, you need a cat. And so he was about 10 years old and had the cat in his lap, and it was during a thunderstorm, and lightning struck the tower, and the cat launched itself clear across the room from his lap. And my son kind of has a funny look on his face, and he goes, "Dad?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "I just learned one thing." He says, "Don't have a cat on your lap in a thunderstorm." And I says, "Why is that?" He says, "Because those claws really dig in."
Oh no! Oh no!
So yeah.
Don't have a cat on your lap in a thunderstorm. That sounds like a Roger Miller song right there. Don't have a cat on your lap in a thunderstorm.
Yeah, yeah. So
wow.
There's all kind of. I mean, I could tell you tons of stories. We could burn another hour pretty easily, but it was a fascinating place to live. I can tell you that.
I got to visit there during a Dayton Ham Fest, probably a good, it must have been 15 plus years ago. But it seemed there were several transmitters in the building at WLW. I mean, in addition to the 500,000 watt transmitter, it seems like there were at least 350 kilowatt. Am I counting right? What was there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was the original Western Electric, and it ran up until, I don't know, after I left, I guess, some changes happened and some stuff froze up, and the radiator, I think, broke. It was water cooled. And the Crosley transmitter was a cathinode, and it was, if you kind of think how an MW50 works, in other words, you've got a tube modulating a tube. Yeah. And the MW50s and the MW series of transmitters uses PDM, and that keeps the efficiency up. Well, there was a guy named R.J. Rockwell who was the engineer for Avco and for Powell Crosley. And he came up with this idea to build a hi-fi transmitter. that would pretty much go out to 20 kilohertz or beyond. And they had a tube to modulate it in the B plus side, and then they had a tube to modulate it on the anode side, and this thing literally swung the tube up and down to produce the amplitude modulation. Very linear, very clean. They had asked McIntosh of the amplifier fame to come in and do the proof of performance on the transmitter, and it was phenomenal for the day.
Wow.
Trouble is, it was about 30% efficient AC to RF.
Okay.
So it was very expensive to operate. So that was eventually converted to a high-level plate mod rig, and I actually got it running. It was not running when I first came there. I got it running. We had a 317 Continental, 317 C1. That was a rig, great rig, could modulate to beat the band. There were tuning tricks you could do to really get it to peak positive. And one of my good engineering friends, a guy by the name of Jay Crawford, who was kind of a local Cincinnati legend, Jay described it as a conglomeration of power supplies that accidentally puts out RF. And because it's got all these 3,000 and 20,000 and all these supplies stacked on top of each other, and then of course we eventually put in a DX50, and I know we spoke about Randy Michaels earlier. He kept coming to me and going, "Is it time to get a new transmitter?" And I said, "Well, let's let this whole digital thing shake out." And I said, I don't want to put, that kind of money in a transmitter and then have to throw it out. So and then finally, when it got to the point the parts were getting hard to get, I said, yeah, it's time. And boom, got a new transmitter. Excuse me. And then the 3DX50 is there, another Gates Harris item that was beta. And since Harris was right down the road, they came to us, and we put the very first rig in, and lots of experimenting and testing, and it was just literally sitting right out in the middle of the floor, and it still kind of is. But eventually they came back and put in a production version of that transmitter. So Paul, that's the lineup on that.
The one time I got to visit there, I was on a tour. I peeked into a trash can that was there in a work area, and I saw a piece of paper. And on that paper was written a note. Now, I have my own supposition about why this note was in the trash can, but I'll tell you what the note said, and maybe you can tell me what the backstory is. The note said, it was on an 8.5 by 11, just piece of paper laying in there. It said, "Remember to return to 700 kilohertz before putting on air." I heard it had something to do with WBT in Charlotte.
I don't know about that one.
Okay.
No, that one doesn't ring a bell with me. The only thing I can figure is that might have been when Harris was testing on site, and maybe they were wanting to run some tone tests or something, so they shifted it down, to a different frequency, and ran some tests into the dummy load, and that might be it. But that's kind of a weird note.
I heard that WBT in Charlotte at 1110 had the same transmitter, but on a higher frequency, and they had some kind of little problem that Harris couldn't reproduce. So they came by WLW at night, put it in the dummy load, and ran it at 1110 to try to recreate the problem, whatever it was. And somebody had the forethought, or maybe it was afterthought, after they messed it up once, to return it to 700 before they put it back on the air.
That would be that would be very noble of them to return it to the right frequency. I'm sure everybody all the way around would appreciate that. including WBT.
A big station like WLW, what did they use for STL from 1111 Gregory to the transmitter site?
Well, we had told you about a really great relationship with the phone company. We had phone
Cincinnati,
loops,
yeah.
we had a Catlink T1.
Oh yeah,
and that was put in. I don't think many of us had ever heard of Intraplex yet, and so we got the Catlink system and put it in, and we had some problems with that thing glitching, and that's when I learned that the carrier, or the primary frequency of a T1 is 772 kilohertz, and so I ended up moving the T1 equipment to the lead line, one of the lead lined vaults back in the old 500 kilowatt room to get the field down, because I remember talking to the guys at QEI, and they said, well, that thing will run great in a field of a millivolt. I said, well, or a volt, I think he said. And I said,
volt.
A volt, yeah. And I said, so, well, yeah, but I said, the field in that building's 8 volts per meter. He kind of long pause on the other end, and he's like, oh. So I moved it in the back room, and it cut the field down to about 100 millivolts, and the thing ran fine then. Believe it or not, and this is a tribute to George Marty, we ran Marty STLs, STL 10s, with one caveat. I ran Dolby noise reduction on the STL.
Ah, okay.
I can't remember whether it was type 2 or type 3. But I know I measured out about 90 dB signal to noise on the STL path, but it was a Marty, and it had we were running a stereo path, even though we weren't doing stereo, we were running a stereo path, and I just had it redundant. And so if you lost lost channel 1, you go to channel 2. If you lost channel 2, you go to the Catlink, was the backup. And the one thing I did do with the Catlink was I had some 10K loops running over to my residence next door out of the Catlink that was tied into the router downtown that I could dial into with PC Anywhere and control the router, and I could monitor any source and what was going on from my den at the house right next door to the transmitter site. And the folks at IDB, who was the original audio delivery, was so impressed that I could do that. So you're sitting at home and listening to your router. Yeah. How about that?
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Piece of cake today,
piece of cake today with streaming and encoders and iPhones or computers or whatever.
Yeah,
these are some brilliant things. Oh, there's so many things I could ask you, Paul, and we only have a few more minutes left. We typically go until about 7 or 8 minutes after the top of the hour. Paul, I need you to be thinking of a tip of the week. Something a nugget of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with, or even just a final good story. We're talking to Paul Jellison, Paul of the famous engineer with Jcore, Clear Channel, and iHeart, and now he does all kinds of engineering consulting around. Just a pleasure to talk to. Hey, and speaking of talking to, I want to make sure you know about my friend Mike Dosh at Angry Audio. Now, that guy right there, that is not Mike Dosh, although maybe he wishes it was. This is the new Angry Audio USB analog audio gizmo. And so it's an analog interface for USB. Now, when you buy this, it comes with all the things you need. It comes with the USB audio cable to plug into your computer or laptop. It also comes with the Studio Hub adapters that you're going to need to go from the RJ45 connectors here, balanced audio, into XLR connectors, so you get a professional, +4 in and +4 out. And you say, well, what's different about this? It doesn't even have any controls on it. What's it good for? This is good for, Paul was just talking about a high RF environment. Yeah, this is tested that way. Also, what's cool about this is the way that the ground is broken between your computer ground, and who knows what noise is on that, to your audio system ground. The ground is separated, they're isolated. And so you get super clean audio. Your ground on your analog side is tied through the XLR connectors to your audio ground. So if you've got a super quiet studio, a great environment for quiet, clean audio, you get the performance through here, through this audio interface. This is extraordinarily well designed. It's heavy, it's well shielded, and it's perfect for broadcasters. I want you to check this thing out. When you need professional audio into or out of your PC, that's the thing to do there. It's the USB analog audio gizmo from Angry Audio. Yeah, they got just a bunch of great stuff there at Angry Audio. There's the website, angryaudio.com. And I got to have lunch with Catfish before we head to NAB here. We're supposed to get together sometime, and we'll do it. Also, our show is brought to you in part by Max Connect Wireless. And Max Connect, let's see here. Oh, tell you what, I got the box right here, but let's hear from Gary Morrill, and he'll tell you why Max Connect is good for him.
I'm Gary Morrill, Midwest Regional Director of Engineering for Alpha Media. When I first spoke with Josh Bone about Max Connect, he told me they'd work great for remote transmitter sites where connectivity was a challenge. And he's absolutely right. We even have sites where we're using this as a backup to our STL using Max Connect's dual carrier option, and it works perfectly. We also have times where we need to be able to get out to a venue where it's kind of challenging because everybody and his brother is trying to stream video at the same time, like at a big sporting event. And you know what? Our data gets through every time because it's prioritized packet data. It works for us. It'll work for you. Max Connect. Check it out.
I think you might call this the Facebook and Instagram killer, because even though you're at a stadium full of people who are updating their Facebook with the latest pictures from halftime, your connection, your data connection still works because you get prioritized packet data. You have the most important data on that cell site, except for first responders, but you take priority over everybody else in the stadium. And this stuff actually works. I've done a number of these shows this week in Radio Tech using Max Connect. I just talked to Josh Bone yesterday. What a great guy, and what a great service that he's done for our industry by arranging for this through a multiplicity of carriers: AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, whatever is your favorite there. They can get you a SIM card that'll get you on a special network through one of those carriers and get your data out there with a fixed IP address. It was this box that made staying on the air possible for WEVL in Memphis, Tennessee. I was helping them out, and my goodness, the lightning took out their Comcast modem, and this took its place until they got it fixed. Worked great. Kept them on the air during their fundraiser. MaxConnect.com, Max Connect Group, and they may still be hiring. So they really are moving on there. All right. Thanks a lot, Josh Bone and Max Connect, and also Angry Audio for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. It's our final few minutes with Paul Jellison. Paul, man, I hate to bring the show to a close. There's so much that you could tell us. I wonder if you might have a nugget of wisdom that you'd like to pass along to our young and old engineer viewers and listeners.
Well, this might catch a few people off guard.
Okay.
I don't know if this is necessarily a tech tip, but this is an engineer to another engineer tip. And that is, we're smart people. We know how to listen to transmitters and watch trends and do that kind of thing. And the one thing I've learned in dealing with friends and people that I've worked with and care dearly for is to take care of yourself. And I was 50 years old when I had my first heart incident, and I was at the RAB in Charlotte. I was walking there, and my body started telling me, "Hey, you're walking along here," and my chest was starting to hurt, and I had been under some pretty severe stress. And so I very, very carefully walked back to the hotel and said, "Do you have a shuttle to the hospital?" "Well, yeah, we can run you over there." So I put my stuff up in the room foolishly. And they took me over and said, "Yeah, you got something going on." And long story short, 2 stints later, I learned that to read my body and to listen to my body. And I've had guys work for me that have found themselves in similar situations. And I can tell you, as I was being rolled over to the emergency room, or not the emergency room, but to the, I had went into my doctor, and he did the whole thing and said, "Yeah, you need stents, but I want to take you over to the hospital." And they were rolling me through the tunnel. And the nurse was rolling me along, and this was in northern Cincinnati. And she says, "So, you an engineer?" Yeah. Yeah, I figure. "You guys eat like crap."
Oh.
She says, "You're working on a project, and you grab a cheeseburger and you grab a fry." And she says, "I'd say 90% of the people we work on here are engineers." And of course, they're right down the road from GE. And she says, "So that's my tech tip is listen to your body and take care of yourself." I mean, I cannot stress enough how you've got, and the other thing is don't let this stress get to you. You've got, because sometimes these can be pressure cooker jobs when you've got a station like WLW off the air, and or a network down, or a problem, and that's, yeah, you just got to take care of yourself. And I hope that helps somebody out there. I really do.
That, boy, what advice. And it's interesting how a lot of engineers like you and like me, we have an interesting, maybe some people have an addiction to an adrenaline high. Like people who work in emergency rooms. I know people like that who aren't effective unless they feel like they're under pressure. And I say not effective. They don't think they're effective. They may be wonderful even without all that pressure. But you're right. A lot of times we don't eat right, and we allow too much pressure to affect everything about us.
Yeah, and I've always been told that I'm cool as a cucumber when we're dealing with situations like that. If you could only see the inside. I related the story about the 500,000 people sitting waiting for the fireworks to start one time, and it took 10 minutes. We were 10 minutes late getting the fireworks on, and I just had to sit there and let the people do their job, and they did, and we got on. But the biggest show of the season sometimes you gotta roll with it. And
that's a story I'd love to hear on a different episode. But man, I can really appreciate your advice about us taking care of ourselves. I know what you mean.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yep. All righty.
All right, Paul Jellison. Paul, man, I appreciate you making time to spend some time with us and our audience. Thank you very, very much, and I hope to have you back on again sometime.
It flew by. Thank you very much for having me.
It did. Paul Jellison has been our guest. I guess he's available for work, but I guess he's probably also trying to take it easy, like you just talked about. Chris Tarr, hopefully, will be back with us next week. Next week, we're doing our show. We're going to be at the Public Radio Engineering Conference in Las Vegas ahead of the NAB show. And then the week after that, we'll be on the show floor at the Max Connect booth with Josh Bone and a whole bunch of characters. So check that out. I want to thank Suncast for producing our show today. Thank you very much. Thanks also to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. We got to go. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.